Please welcome our keynote speaker, Sheila Johnson and Rachel Humphrey.
Excellent. Sheila, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here in front of all of these people.
I know, look at this place.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we are going to jump right in. Something that you and I have in common is that we both describe ourselves as being in the middle of our third act of our careers, and both describe it as our best act yet. And for those who might not be quite as familiar with your story, your first act is as concert violinist and philanthropist in the arts. Your second act as corporate entrepreneur and executive with the co-founding of BET. And now what you describe as your third act in hospitality. We just saw the video a second ago of the Salamander Hotels and Resorts, and also partial owner of 3 professional sports teams. So quite a journey so far. We want to start off talking a little bit about leadership. And what have these 3 acts contributed collectively maybe to you as the leader we see in front of us today, but also maybe a life lesson you learned in each one of those along the way?
Well, I think first of all, in my first act is probably one of the most important acts that really, I think, solidified who I am. Through the arts, you really do learn the real basics of how to run yourself. I've learned to be vulnerable more than anything. And being vulnerable, you're able to listen to people. You really have got to understand your strengths and your weaknesses. And I wasn't just a violinist, I was also an orchestra conductor. So there were a lot of things that I learned in conducting the orchestra, which has now gone through all 3 phases of my life. Not only do I have to listen and watch every instrument in the orchestra, but I also have to be able to communicate with my eyes, my ears, and to be really super organized in my thought processes, how I'm going to either bring a piece alive. So I take those lessons that I learned in the first act of my life to then move on to the second act, which was doing a whole media company, which absolutely everything that I learned in the first act of my life really carried on through BET. It was a lot more complicated because we were building a network from the ground up, and it was the birth of all cable networks at the time. And the reason why we wanted to start BET was because there was no voice being enhanced out there in the public for the African American community. So that was actually harder, but to understand the culture and to be able to build a company from the ground up. But to be able to listen and watch and make sure that we were really taking care of our fan base, but also trying to build good programming. That to me was the hardest, and I think that's where BET failed, where it didn't build the programming that I wanted. I wanted it to be really kind of the news network for the African American voice to really talk about the issues at hand, but it turned into more of a video company, which, you know, that's what sells. And so anyway, that part didn't work. And so once BET was sold to Viacom, I then sat back and tried to decide, what am I going to do now with my life? I said, I'm still relatively young. And I will tell you this story. I really stumbled into the hotel business because there was a piece of property that was brought to me by a broker, and it belonged to Pamela Harriman. And it bordered the town of Middleburg, Virginia. It was 340 acres. And I'm watching a town that was literally financially and economically dying. It was bankrupt. They had no set of retail establishments, no restaurants, but it was isolated in Northern Virginia, and it was all horse country, and that's what people wanted. They wanted that isolation. And I said, this is crazy, and they can't pay their bills, and what's going on? So I decided to buy this property, and the light bulb went off. I said, I'm going to build a resort. Now, that was all well and done, But then when I would go to banks and I put the feasibility study together, I knew it was going to work because we're 30 minutes from Dulles Airport, but I couldn't get any loans from a bank. I had to build that resort with my own money from the ground up. And this is the hard reality, especially for women and people of color. They cannot get the attraction from any banks out there to help them start a business. And this is still going on, and I co-chair the Greater Washington Partnership in Washington, D.C., where we raised $4.5 billion to help minority-owned businesses really get a leg up. I don't know where that money is right now, but we'll see what happens. But anyway, to make a very long story short, that was a 10-year fight for me, because here was this woman coming in, new to the community, and I designed the hotel with WATG out of Newport Beach, California. I presented it to the town and to the council, and all hell broke loose. I have never seen a fight like this in my life. It was a racial fight that I had to really work through. I had never been more nervous in my life. And when the votes finally came down, I won by 1 vote.
It's incredible.
So fast forward, here we are with a wonderful resort. It has won the Forbes 5-Star Awards, both in spa and the hotel. We were like 4 years in a row here. The spa won for the first time this year. And it's just been an enormous success. I mean, everywhere I go throughout the country knows about Salamander. So from there, I was able to start with that brand and then able to pick up more. So I'll back up just a little bit. Once Salamander, the fight started, I had hired some of the best people in the industry to help me do it. Now, this is a lesson for everybody. I didn't know anything about the hotel business. I didn't know anything about cable business either. But I didn't know anything about the hotel business, and I said what I had to do is I had to find the best people out there that could teach me about the business. To this day, those same people are with me. And it has just been an extraordinary adventure. And I have, we have over 3,000 employees. I could never build that company without the team of executives that I have today. And I'll be the first. You talk about vulnerability. That was vulnerability. And the other thing was I wanted to be a leader in my own right in really establishing the value system of the company. What do we stand for? What are we really all about? And I have learned that leadership is extraordinarily important in trying to run a company. I'm very hands-on. Yes, we have 7 hotels now, and we're growing. But I want to be able to really be able to put my stamp of approval and really watch what's going on, because I never want the quality of what I have built so far to stumble. And I teach those lessons to everybody out there. I sit on my executives about it. I listen to them carefully. So I listen to them, I try to inspire, I try to motivate, and I try to guide them into the direction of the vision that I've been trying to build.
Well,
and that's what's important.
Fantastic. And there's so many topics I want to elaborate on a little bit in there. I want to talk about one of the first comments that you made about the struggle for access to capital and to be taken seriously. And I want to put that in perspective for everybody. You were a woman with hundreds of millions of dollars in personal net worth at that time, and you still couldn't get access to capital.
That's right. I mean, I had a horrible situation. I will not name the bank, but I mean, I had hundreds of millions of dollars in this bank. And I remember going there and saying, look, I would like you to help me with this resort. They just didn't take me seriously at all. I pulled every cent out of that bank. And then I'll mention the bank that I'm with now, JP Morgan. They have been behind me 100%. Not in the very beginning. I had to prove myself. And not only did I have to prove myself, and they saw what I had gone through, but what I also started to build. And then I was able to get an investor in there that really could kind of get us over the hump, because it takes 3 to 5 years to get a hotel really successful financially. So I had, it's kind of, I call it a bridge loan until I get there. And once we were able to pay that back under the 5-year window, then things started happening. But people now are really watching. I'm an outlier from everybody in this room. I specialize in high-end luxury, and we're smaller hotels. I mean, this hotel that I'm sitting in now, I've never seen anything like it. This is the biggest hotel I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, yes, it has been a struggle, and I'm very sensitive to this because there's so many people who want to start hotels that just can't do it because they cannot. It's a hard journey. It's a very hard journey, and if you're a woman and a person of color, it is almost impossible.
Well, that took a lot of perseverance, certainly, to do that. And I
Right.
want to talk about your upbringing a little bit. I've heard you speak very publicly that you moved 13 times growing up, that your father was a neurosurgeon but not allowed to practice in white hospitals.
That's right.
That your mother instilled in you to never use the word can't. And I imagine that the collection of those couple of things really played a role in having enough fight to continue to pursue the vision that you saw for Salamander in Middleburg. Talk a little bit about that background and how some of those things impacted you and gave you that perseverance that you needed, because it would have been very easy for you to walk away from the opportunity the minute you hit any challenges.
Right. Okay, let's talk about adversity. I grew up with adversity with a capital A. My father was one of 8 African-American neurosurgeons in the country, went to Howard Medical because he also couldn't go into other colleges. So I watched him struggle trying to get appointed to a hospital, and it just would never happen, never happen. So he ended up going into the VA. The VA even said you can only practice on African American patients. Once you have finished that group, because we're coming out of, what was it, the Japanese-American War or something like that, that's all I remember. And once he finished that group of patients, then we were moved to another city. The 13 times that I moved, people said, wasn't that really tough for you? When I look back on it, it wasn't, because it helped me assimilate into all cultures. Yes, there were people that called me the N-word as we moved to different cities, but I also learned how to cope. And I built a lot of resilience in how to really blend into the different communities that we moved into. It's all there was. I remember living over a barber shop in Menneson, Pennsylvania, and dealing with cockroaches and rats. But you know, you do what you have to do to keep moving on in life. It's just the way it is. But I wouldn't be sitting up on this stage now if I hadn't gone through that adversity and that tough upbringing. And not only that, people not accepting us for our brains, but it was all about skin color. And they just didn't, and look, I'm light, how could they tell? And, my father too. But, I'm in the middle of reading Michelle Miller's book from CBS, and she went through the exact same thing. So there are a lot of similar stories out there of African Americans who just aren't being accepted, even though you're moving around. And it was tough.
Well, you've described yourself as a vulnerable leader, and certainly
Yes.
appreciate your sharing that. I want to turn to the hotel business for a couple minutes. Obviously, sitting in a room full of hotel owners and investors, Salamander is known for what you refer to as welcoming luxury, hospitality for everyone. But there's a lot of segments of the industry, and then the Washington Business Journal named you CEO of the Year, and when they did, they cited your resilience, again, coming out of the pandemic for your role in recovery. Thinking about the audience we have here today, how did you know that luxury was the segment that best met your vision for your business? And then also, what were maybe some of the things that you leaned into during the pandemic to really instill that recovery in your team and your businesses as quickly as you did?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the first act in my life. As a concert violinist, I toured globally. I played with Yehudi Menuhin, Max Rostow. I remember giving a concert in Gstaad. I went and stayed in some of the finest hotels all over Europe, and that stayed in my mind. So I knew that I loved the luxury business. I loved what it stood for. It was just a great experience. So that's how I knew I was going to go into, if I was going to do this, it's going to have to be luxury.
Okay.
Secondly, with the pandemic coming on, I did not want to give up just because it was happening. Now, we closed down for about 2.5 months, and the governor, and I knew him, said, look, he says, you all can reopen. You're sitting on 340 acres. Just keep people outside, you know, distance. We will come check on it. We go through verified. I thought it was the greatest opportunity that could have ever happened to us because as an artist, I like to think visionary. I'm like, come on, guys, what can we do to make this the most exciting time? Because we're going to be in this for a while. We did things, we came up with ideas like schoolcation. We would take the first floor of our hotel and we would set up computers, and we had brought in tutors. And we advertised that you could bring your kids, they can continue with school, parents could come, they could drink at the bar, they could do spa. We booked like you wouldn't believe. It was just unbelievable. They even had gym class, PE. We took them out on horses. The kids loved it. And this was one thing that we were able to do. When we were closed down for the 2.5 months, that's when we went in and we did all that deferred maintenance. And so when we reopened, it was like even a newer hotel. We went in there. So schoolcation was one of them. One of the things that I do is I have a film festival, and I can get into why I do these things. But I wanted to keep everybody employed. So I said, look, we're going to go on and have this film festival. Everybody was terrified because we usually use the entire town to set up screenings all over the place, which, by the way, brings in a ton of money to the town. It's now the smallest historic and wealthiest town in the state of Virginia because of what we were able to do. So I set up a big, huge screen on our back lawn. We provided everybody with blankets, and we would draw circles around. They had to stay in their circle to watch these movies. We did drive-in theaters. The people that were on one side of the hotel that were facing the screen, they were able to sit out on the balconies. We delivered dinners to them. We were able to screen movies over computers for people in DC who normally come out to the film festival, and we had a catering company then deliver their dinners to them while they were watching the movies. So we pivoted to make it work. We never lost a dime. It came out $300,000 ahead. So it's things like that. The American Ballet Company came in. Again, we distanced. We had a stage up in New York. These 7 buses with all the ballet dancers came in. But you do things that are going to bring experiences not only to your fan base, but also to my employees. They love this so much. They really did. The other thing, and I took a big leap of faith on this, and this was the 2nd year into the pandemic, I started something called the Family Reunion with a great James Beard Award-winning chef, Kwame Amawachi. We decided that we were going to, all on the back lawn, really talk about and bring in the 40 of the top chefs from all over the country. And it was called, as I said, the Family Reunion, but we wanted to really talk about foods from the African diaspora. Again, the reason why I did this is because of the importance of diversity. Our hotel group is probably one of the most diverse hotel groups out there. When you saw over 800 people of color show up, and we were able to really talk about the issues of trying to get African American businesses started. And we have the top chefs up there from Alexander Smalls to Carla Hall, you name them, to talk about the struggles that they've had where their restaurants have closed down in Brooklyn and all over the place. But this was probably one of the most important events that we ever had. And then we got a call from Dave Chappelle. He says, look, I'm in town, can I come out? So I didn't tell anybody that he was coming, and he pops out on the stage. I have never seen people party so much till 4 in the morning. But what we were able to do was talk about the issues of diversity. It's not just checking the box, but learning to talk about it, live with it, and how we can really enhance businesses out there and make this country much more diverse. This is so important, and here I'm sitting in one of the greatest cities in Atlanta, which is a very diverse city, but also a very segregated city. Come on, people, we have got to start including everybody in this. And so what we are trying to do within the value system of my company is to really drive diversity and how we can work together, because without those different voices, you're never going to grow. We have conversations, and we're comfortable with having these conversations because of what we are doing and the way we are doing it. And I'm just never going to give up.
Well, I'm so happy to hear you bring up family reunion, because I actually wanted to ask you a couple of things about that. There are tremendous organizations in hospitality right now that are doing great things to elevate women and other underrepresented groups into leadership. But we have a long way to go. We're seeing some change, a long way to go. What do you think, again, thinking about your audience here, you are in a room full of tremendous leaders. What do we need to do as an industry to move the needle a little bit farther and a little bit faster?
Just don't talk about it, do something about it. And that's what's important. We can't be afraid anymore. We can't. The world is changing. And unfortunately, what we're seeing out there now is not changing for the better. I'm asking everybody in this room who are leaders, CEOs, please, it is incumbent that you all take a leadership role in trying to make this country healthier. Excellent. It's because if we keep having this division, we're going to see more and more problems. You're going to see problems on the crime level. And the reason why the crimes are out there, because people feel left out. They feel left out. They're not being given a chance. And, you know, I'm just this little woman sitting up on the stage, but I'm trying to be vocal about this and try to be an example of the value system of Salamander. And I'll tell you what Salamander means, because you all think I'm crazy having a name called Salamander. But anyway, that's what I'm trying to do within our company. Now, can I tell them what Salamander means?
I would love it.
Okay. After I sold Black Entertainment Television, I moved to Middleburg, Virginia, because my daughter was a show jumper and all that kind of stuff. Don't do it. Lose a lot of money. But anyway, I bought a farm, and it was from a man by the name of Bruce Sunman. It was really Bill Ildesacker, and he was only on that farm for 8 months. But he had a name of the farm which I couldn't stand. And I went back to the previous owner, and I found out the name of the farm was Salamander. And I got to meet Bruce Sunman, who was a World War II fighter pilot and was shot down over Nazi-occupied Belgium. He was able to escape, but his entire unit was captured into a POW camp. He was able to cross through Europe on bicycles and ended up in Allied territory of France. The U.S. came to him and they said, look, we've got to go back and we have got to rescue them out of this POW camp, your unit. And he says, we're going to give you the code name Salamander. And he says, well, what does that mean? They said, well, mythically, it's the only animal that can walk through fire and still come out alive. But if you cut off its limbs, they regenerate. Now, I was going through a nightmare period of my life personally, and I immediately jumped on it. I said, I would like to have that name. And he goes, well, what are you going to do with it? I said, I don't know, but I have an idea in mind that I'm going to start a hotel company. And I said, I want to name it Salamander. He said, well, good luck to you. But anyway, it's a true story. If those of you in the room remember the story of Hogan's Heroes, that is Bruce Sunman's life.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I have taken the Salamander, And that's what we live by. I have it on my lapel here. And it stands for perseverance, courage, and fortitude. And that's part of our value system.
And all words that I've used to
Yes,
describe you at various
absolutely.
times. That's fantastic.
Yes.
You mentioned your daughter being a show jumper, and that brings me to something else that you have in common, which is the belief that youth sports and the arts and involvement in it are tremendous impetuses behind moving into leadership. And I think
Right.
Ernst & Young did a study that 90% of women in the C-suite in the United States participated in sports in their
No.
youth.
It's absolutely true. Now, I am vice chairman of Monumental Sports, and one of the main teams that I'm in charge of is the WNBA's Washington Mystics. I also own the Wizards and the Capitals. But the WNBA team, I have really taken under my wing, because when first of all, as a woman, you never get a chance to own teams, okay? So Abe Pollin, who was alive at the time, owned the Wizards. Ted Leonsis had already bought the Caps, but he also had first right of refusal once Abe passed to take over this ownership, which was then Lincoln Holdings. The WNBA team was never mentioned in this package. So Abe Pollin came to me and said, Sheila, I really want you to be the face of the Washington Mystics. And I said, what do you mean by face? You want me to own it, right? And he said, yes. And I said, I've got to see the financials on it. And so he gave them to me. He says, just be open-minded about this. So I said, I realized then that was a door that had opened for me that I didn't want to close yet. So I said, well, let me think about it. He says, you got to do this quickly, because he says, I just need to move fast on this. So he says, and this is highly confidential. So I get in the car, I call my lawyer, and I said, Sandy, I've just been offered to buy a basketball team. He says, do not do it. And I said, look, if you had been offered this, what would you do? And he got silent. And I said, you just answered my question. Because men are willing to take risk like this, and they get more opportunities. And I said, I will be in your office in 10 minutes, but get Ted Leonsis on the phone. I talked to Ted, and I said, Ted, I got an offer you can't refuse. I've just been offered the Washington Mystics, and I said, but I want to buy into the Wizards, because I know you have first right of refusal when that happens, and I want to buy into the Capitals. I said, I want to put in just as much money as you men have, but I want to be right there. So I found out I put in a little bit more. So anyway, I said, you get a woman and an African American. If you look across the league, there's no one in an ownership that has that. And he says, I love the idea, let me go to the other partnership. And so sure enough, they came right back and said, yes, you can do it. So I was able to get in there, and he named me vice chairman of Monumental Sports. So my job is to really try, is not only do I work with the other teams, and the reason why I wanted to buy those other teams was we move losses through the teams. You know how that works, guys, right? That's how we stay alive. And of course, the hockey's the big umbrella that really keeps things alive. But we're able to work together, and what's so important about that, and I'll talk about the double bottom line real quick because we're running out of time, and it's community. Not only is that double bottom line important that we really work with the community through the teams, sports is the greatest unifier. And the reason why I'm working with the WNBA team, because I'm looking at my time, is because it's so important to bring girls through team sports. It teaches them how to focus, it teaches them how to negotiate, it gives them a sense of confidence like you would not believe. I follow them with the NCAA. I brought the NCAA finals to Tampa twice. They're coming back next year, which I'm excited about. Oh, there's so much I can talk about. It really does prepare them for the C-suite in corporate America, because I watch men carefully, whether it's on the golf course or whether they're picking up b-ball out there, they're able to fight with one another and still come out as friends. And I want to teach those women how to be able to negotiate on the court, however, how to be focused and to be able to learn how to win. I like winning. And when we won our national championship, I couldn't believe it, but we pulled it through. Because I had the team since 2007, so we were able to win the Stanley Cup, and we were able to win a national championship with the WNBA. Oh, it went up to 4 now.
Gave you more time.
Oh, thank you. Anyway, that's why it's so important. I mean, I watch every quarter of a game, and I go back into the locker room, and especially at halftime, and I listen to my coach. Every quarter, when a team goes out on the first quarter, they're really trying to figure out the strengths and the weaknesses of the other team. Second quarter, once they've got to figure it out fast, they are then able to start negotiating on the court of how they're going to get past them. They go into the halftime. I go back in the locker room. I listen to the coach, and he says, okay, now it's do or die. We're in the third and fourth quarter. We know what we're doing. They go over the X's and O's and what they need to do. Third quarter, they come out as a different team. And you'll see that if you watch, well, you can see it with the Caps too. Well, they got the 3 big quarters. But anyway, teams change after the locker room. They can literally turn the table. And that's what's going on in there. They have at that point been able to assess their competitor. Then in the fourth quarter, we know that we have to go for the juggler. And these are the lessons that these young women learn in the locker room. The men know how to do it. This is then taken to the corporate boardroom, and this is what's so important. I want to toughen up the women. I want to build their confidence and let them know they're going to run into adversity, but never, ever give up under any circumstances.
Well, as the mom of 2 daughters, I can tell you how important that is, how inspirational it is to all of us. As you mentioned, even with the luxury of a couple of extra minutes, we're going to run short on time. I want to pivot very quickly to academia. You are a university professor teaching on leadership development and known for having world-class teams around. And you mentioned earlier, you couldn't have done it without the team you brought in. What are 1 or 2 things you look for when you're hiring, or leadership traits that you identify right away as non-negotiables in the team you hire around you?
Well, first of all, when I hire, I have to make sure that the person's not coming in with their own agenda. And believe me, I've kissed a couple of frogs. And it's not been good. They've got to really buy into our value system and our vision. And I'll tell you something, and I think this is really important. I've been teaching down at the University of South Carolina in hospitality and leadership. And it's a 3-hour course that would meet every Monday. I would fly in and then fly back out. But one thing that I came up with, which has just been brilliant, every one of my executives has to team teach with me.
Oh, wow.
And it's been terrific because we've been able to not only recruit, but I don't want them to just hear my voice all the time. So every segment of my executive team and my sports, I give them a plethora of all sorts of situations that go on in the hospitality business. It has been so much fun. I have even taken, I don't know if you all know about Ben's Chili Bowl in DC, but I brought 90-year-old Virginia Ali down with all of her half smokes. And we have talked about, because that's hospitality and retail, and we've even played her civil rights documentary about how there were just 3 businesses that were left during the riots. She was able to keep going, but the things that I didn't know, I didn't realize Martin Luther King had written that I Have a Dream speech was worked on in Ben's Chili Bowl. And when Barack Obama, and this woman, she says, I never would have thought in my lifetime, our first black president, and he ate at Ben's Chili Bowl. She says, my business went through the roof, and still is. But these are the stories that these young people need to hear, and I know we're out of time. but they need to hear these stories, and it's just been wonderful. And this is the greatest thing about hospitality. There are no boundaries whatsoever. The world is your oyster. Let's just make it work.
Well, Sheila, you described yourself a minute ago as a little woman, and I want to tell you, you are a giant inspiration and a giant trailblazer. I don't have a hospitality bucket list, but if I had one, getting to spend some time with you certainly would have been on it. Thank you for everything that you're doing for the industry.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.